So this one's going to be probably shorter than last time, because I'm in a bit of a go slow at the minute, so I'm not sure I'll have much to talk about. So hi, I'm Dibs. Today we will be answering questions and talking about my involvement with Super Kids, and maybe some other stuff along the way. I shouldn't give myself things to fiddle with, it'll just make noise. Right, so I'm going to start with the questions and see where we go from there. Nila asked about how we characterize our characters, or how we write them and create them. Often with characters I like to give them kind of a thing that I know that I'm invested in about them, so that I don't drift them to being like a kind of a default type character. So like, you know, you'd probably have like a character that's like your comfort zone, or a kind of character that's your comfort zone. And then if you're not careful, I think you can risk taking characters from all around here and just kind of driving them to this neutral point, because it's more comfortable for you. So I think having kind of a very set idea of a certain kind of vibe can really help avoid driving them to a place that's comfortable for you but doesn't work for the character or for the story. Because I know I have issues driving characters to places that are comfortable for me or don't make me uncomfortable, and then it's not what I need at all and I have to just rewrite an entire scene, which isn't ideal at all. So I do try and consciously avoid that. I do still find myself gravitating towards characters that are close to my comfort zone, and that I do enjoy writing in that way. I find it easier to get in their heads and all. You're not often going to find me writing unnecessarily cruel characters or just kind of malicious characters, because I just, it's not in my comfort zone at all. Reading or watching characters like that can be fun, but it's not something that I easily get into the headspace for. So I tend to avoid that kind of character type, which already takes one of the extreme points from that kind of, you know, diagram almost, away from me. But at this current point, I haven't got much of a reason to write that sort of character. I'm sure if I did have a reason, I'd be able to manage it, especially if they were very, like, explicitly kind of a bad character. But if they had to go beyond much depth or like come off as likable, I'd just be far too tempted to do a redemption arc or something, and half the time that's not what you want. So there's that. Often though with characters I do end up kind of getting taken away by them. If I have a good enough idea of the sort of character it is, they're very easy to write and they almost write themselves. But it doesn't always happen, but so far I'm not in that situation. I'm sure I could probably do stuff to make characters more distinct, but at the minute it's working out fine, so we're okay. One thing I do like to think about is dynamics between characters and how that can change how the characters behave. Because you're not going to behave the same way with some people as with others. You know, a lot of characters are changed when they're interacting with others, and that can be antagonistic in nature. That can be making them kind of softer. You got that with the Bad Batch, really, because I didn't like them during the Clone Wars, but as soon as they got Omega in their series, they were instantly all more likeable because of the way that they were interacting with her and with each other within the context of having to take care of her. It really changed their characters for the better, I would say, which is a formula that Star Wars has seemed to kind of work out and lean on quite a bit recently. But, it's true, and that's a nice, easy way of making characters more likeable. And it's a way of making them more interesting, because you're not necessarily always going to be acting kind of, I guess, true to yourself, or like as your default state if you're with other people. You do kind of switch gears, and seeing how characters interact with different people can really kind of help give them an amount of depth relatively easily. A lot of my characters at the minute are kind of mildly antagonistic with each other, but like in a friendly sort of way. It's more banter than anything. And they wouldn't necessarily be acting that way if it weren't for how they kind of perceive the characters around them. Like Jasper really isn't impressed with Amy's general attitude and energy level, so he's quite hostile towards her. And she herself isn't necessarily impressed with this hostility, but Jasper's generally more of a quiet character. He's not, necessarily a hostile character, but he is with Amy because he just finds her incredibly irritating. And then Max asked about our writing goals, both current and long term. Current is just getting through my various projects. They shouldn't be too long in terms of word count, but they can probably end up taking months. If it takes me 4 months to write 14,000 words, I have no way of telling how long the various stuff I've got going on is going to take. Nothing's going to be novel length. It's all going to be relatively short, but it will probably take a few months at least. And then in the long term, I don't particularly know. I may or may not end up investigating being a developmental fiction editor, which would be interesting, which would lead me on as well to talking about Super Kids and my involvement with that. Basically, Max brought me in to look it over February-ish time, maybe March, can't quite remember, to kind of, go over it all. And the biggest issue he was having was the end of book 2. I was the one who recommended putting it into 2 books. I think originally it had been, and then it got put into 1 book. But the length of it, I think it was probably quite grating on him as being one monster of a book. And so I was just just make it 2 books. And so that's that. So at the end of book 2, he hadn't written the proper climax, because everything had kind of got tangled up. I was just kind of going along. I was like, listen, whatever you end up writing, I'll be like, yeah, fine, whatever. I assumed he had it all under control, but apparently not. So we ended up pretty much restructuring the entirety of book 2, giving it clearer kind of stakes, clearer goals, reducing the amount of engagements with a certain character who just kind of turned up and then left the exact same way for 5 different fight scenes, and it just got really repetitive and blurry. So we kind of tried to solidify all of that. It's hopefully going to end up pretty different to the version I read, although I don't think we've quite got up to that part in the second draft yet. Book 1 was more an approach to prose, I think, and solidifying certain elements, but generally that didn't need as much work. Hopefully it shouldn't need too much stuff doing to it. And there is obviously an issue with people having different writing styles, I wouldn't write certain paragraphs the same way that Max would, and so you kind of have to be, when you're looking and reading over that stuff, you have to kind of go, is this a genuine critique that I'm thinking of, or is it just my personal preference? I try and be clear when I think it could be a matter of personal preference, but I don't know if it kind of inhibits me from making certain, recommendations that, I might otherwise kind of give to myself when writing. So it's weird, it's a balancing game. I do think it will need to, once all the beta readers have gone through it, it'll need to be gone over again. But hopefully, eventually it can be put to rest and uploaded and later published, I guess. That would be fun. I've been helping with a lot of Max's other stuff, not so much in the last week or so, because I think we've all been kind of hitting a slump at the minute. I know I have, and I think Max was complaining the other day about it as well. So, it's kind of been a sounding board for a lot of other stuff. And I think I'm more qualified to make recommendations and judgment calls about bigger picture stuff like structure and character arcs and all of that than I am grammar, because I kind of suck at grammar. And there's also the issue of different versions of English having different grammatical standards. Like one thing that always annoys me is Americans put an S at the end of anyway, just all the time. No, don't do that. And there's also someone is a part of, rather than being part of something else, or jumping off of something instead of jumping off it. Weird little kind of things that irritate me, but like probably pretty standard in other versions of English, so that just makes me feel more like unstable with making that sort of judgment on people's writing. I can just about cope with my own. I feel very unqualified talking about other people's. So yeah, there's that. That I guess answers Max's questions. So we've done answering questions. I've discussed briefly Super Kids. As I say, at the minute my brain's kind of blank, so I'm not going to be going into too much depth with things. I'm sure later I'll have more to talk about in depth. I suggested that at the end of the month we do calls on Discord where we talk with each other and record those, which may help get more conversation about this kind of thing going. So look forward to that. If it happens, it might be a bit of a logistical nightmare because we're in 3 different time zones that span about 10 hours, which unfortunately is about the amount of time in the day. So one of us would be getting up ridiculously early, one of us would be staying up ridiculously late, probably. So my question is there something that you like that you've learnt in, school or online or through experience, that you kind of think of when you're writing and try to apply when you're writing? Or is there something that you should be doing so with, but you can never quite do it? With me, it's getting more subconscious. It's repetition in sentence starters. That's pretty subconscious at this point, which kind of drilled into me in GCSE a bit, because that was something we were doing a lot for English language. Largely my issue was putting, I think, verbs and adverbs at the beginning of sentences, because it can sound really clunky, but the trick is just finding places where it doesn't sound clunky and using those opportunities instead of just leaving it and then kind of realising halfway through you've started all your sentences with the same word, the same boring word like the, or he, or she, whatever. Taking the opportunities when you have them to kind of do something outside the norm. Same goes with cliches and metaphors. If you've got an opportunity to use that sort of thing, take it whilst you can, because there's going to be long stretches where you just won't be able to have that sort of opportunity. So find them, use them, and hopefully it can help raise your storytelling and writing capabilities. So yeah, that's basically all I have to say at the minute. Oh yeah, also, I've got a free trial for Scrivener at the minute. It's pretty good so far. It's got a good interface. It's got a dark mode, which is more pleasant to write on. Although I did find a dark mode that works on Google Docs through a Firefox browser plugin, but it does kind of help concentrate on everything. I've been planning out another story that I may talk about at some point later on when I'm feeling more up to it. That's been quite a lot of a pain to plan out. So I've been writing that on Scrivener and also planning it on Clip Studio Paint, which is the program I use to draw on my laptop. Because that way, like, you could do it kind of physically on paper, but then you run out of space on the paper. So on Clip Studio Paint, you just expand the canvas and make it bigger, and that kind of sorts your problem out. And then you've got all the different layers, so you can put lots of information in the same space and still be able to read all of it. So I've kind of been using that. And also, if you're writing everything out with your hand and doing the arrows and the lines and stuff, you've got a lot more freedom than if you were using specific tools like typing and drawing arrows and stuff in a set program. Like, I think the people who do Scrivener have a kind of mind map program, but I don't think that would work as well for me because I just need that flow. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. It was nice talking to you. I will see you later.